Hello and welcome to today's presentation of personalization in Liferay Portal. Good morning, Derek.
Hey, good morning, Ray.
My name is Ray Cameron. I'm here with Derek Nierenberg, who will be doing today's presentation. I think one of the things I wanted to start out with was the big announcement, just in case anybody's missed it. I know we've got it on our website. You may have seen it in the registration process, but Activia was named the North American Liferay Partner of the Year 2012 at the recent Liferay North America Symposium, something that we're very proud of, and I think Derek's going to mention that a little bit more about that as we get into this. In addition to our Liferay services, Activia also offers services in the area of broader portal development, data management, application development, and business intelligence and data warehousing. You can find out more about all of these services at our website, activia.com. And while you're there, check out our social media links in the upper right corner. You can connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, where we post updates with the company, services, events, and other information on a pretty regular basis. Regarding the webinar today, all of our attendees are on mute, just for the simple ability to manage the webinar and flow smoothly through it. But we do want to have this be an interactive webinar. We'll be taking questions throughout the call. You can submit those at any time, and we'll definitely be addressing those as we wrap up the presentation and get into kind of a Q&A time towards the end of the webinar. We should have plenty of time to take those before we wrap up our what we have planned to be about an hour. Just in case you're new to GoToWebinar, you'll find the Q&A tool on the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. And you're welcome to submit any questions if you have one right now, or if they come up during the presentation, we'd gladly take those, and we'll have those ready to go for Derek upon the conclusion of this presentation. Our presenter today, Derek Nierenberg, is a portal and enterprise solutions architect at Activia. Derek does everything from making minor tweaks on web pages to assessing corporate infrastructures and building plans for successful portal implementations. His expertise is in the area of enterprise portal projects, including new development, integration, and training. And I think with that, Derek, we're ready to go. You ready to dive in?
I sure am. Thanks a lot, Ray. And thanks everyone for attending the webinar. Really appreciate seeing the great turnout that we've got today. And kind of caveating on what Ray has already mentioned, we're going to do the personalization and Liferay Portal webinar today. My name is Derek Nierenberg, Portal and Enterprise Solutions Architect, and I've been working with Activia now for about 6.5 years. A lot of the time doing Liferay Portal implementations, but also branching out into WebSphere Portal and other Java enterprise infrastructures. All right, so on the agenda today, I've gone through this presentation several times live and over the phone, and really one of the ways that I found that it's worked the best is to do it more of a conversation. So a lot of the time I'll be talking to this presentation as if I'm having a conversation with you. And please feel free to put in any questions that you may have into the chat box, and I'll see what I can do to kind of tailor the information to either your question or your industry vertical and give you some real-time examples of how you may be able to use this type of a system in your infrastructure using Liferay or potentially some other type of a system. So in order to effectively do that, I found that it's really helpful to give people a background orientation on Activia and Liferay. If there are people that are on the phone who may not have a Liferay background, but they're interested in Liferay and they know that there's a need for them to be able to personalize either their system artifacts or content and drive them to specific audiences, either through their systems or maybe through advertising campaigns or behavioral marketing or some of those types of things. And one of the things that I think is really important to point out is, this is a solution that we developed that's a case study actually on the Liferay website with the Principal Wellness Company. So we'll go through all of that background information and talk about some of the challenges and solutions that we came up with, and then deep dive into personalization. And personalization is a pretty complex topic. I've not been able to really get a lot of feedback from people outside of the healthcare vertical, because it seems like healthcare people have this need to deliver content and information that spans all of the companies that are in the insurance industry or hospital networks or provider networks. They know that they want to be able to target information to, male smokers over 45 that live in a specific geographic region, for example. And that's something that, since it spans every company that's in that particular vertical, it's very easy to get the point across and to describe it in terms that they understand. But what's not necessarily as easy is explaining those same concepts and applying them to various verticals, whether it's pharmaceuticals, financial services, logistics, education, and all the different areas where we live and see in our daily society, in our daily lives. So as I'm going through this deep dive in personalization, I'll describe a little bit about what personalization is and how it works, how we made it work in Liferay, and the various integration points that maybe you would need to provide customizations for in Liferay, or maybe Activia could provide those customizations for you or work with you in defining what those integration points are. All right, so some of the quick facts about Activia. We've been around for quite a while. I mentioned that I've done a lot of implementations in Liferay Portal and Websphere Portal. We were predominantly a Websphere Portal shop before we became a Liferay shop. And as soon as we became a Liferay shop, when the technology was really starting to take off in, let's see, version 4, I think that was my first implementation with Deutsche Bank Asset Management out in New York, and then we did versions 5, 6, and 6.1 now, and I'm sure that will continue on to 7 as well. Ray had mentioned that we're a Liferay certified platinum level partner, which we've achieved in just a couple of years. We do all kinds of Liferay portal consulting, whether it's simple content management implementations or highly available, highly scalable integrations in large-scale enterprise environments for Fortune 500 companies. So we pretty much run the gamut. We know the software, we know the infrastructure, and we know them all very well. And as a matter of fact, we were recognized as the Liferay Partner of the Year for North America for 2012, and that's an award that they gave to us because of our service excellence and the quality solutions that we've done across the country through some very large organizations, and we've had a lot of great feedback from our customers and a lot of support from them, and taking our solutions out to a broader market. So in this particular case, when we came across personalization, we had a pretty tremendous need to do an implementation with Principal Wellness Company, which is a division of Principal Financial Group, like a Fortune 250 company. And in their particular scenario, they offer all kinds of wellness solutions. And when they came to us, they knew that they wanted to provide a multi-tenant solution so that all of their employer groups that came on and were using their wellness line of business could go into a website and perform electronically all the interactions that they had traditionally performed on paper. So it was a very difficult process for them to manage. A lot of interactions happened on the phone. Employees at those companies would call in and they would talk to people to get the right information, and then the customer service agent or whoever the rep was that worked with Principal Wellness would either fax or mail them a set of forms or a wellness assessment kit, and then they'd do everything through the mail. And we kind of took that entire process online using Liferay Portal and to build the multi-tenant solution. So if you take a look at this particular multi-tenancy model, we developed a theme where each of these companies could come in. They had their own website that was branded. They had their own logo, their own URL where they would put in, my NASCAR Wellness Company, for example, .com, and it would take them to this site, and it would display the appropriate logo, a login, the appropriate content for them to let them know that they're at the right spot, and they would log in and they would interact with the system for whatever they needed to do while interacting with the wellness system. And in this particular solution, it was kind of interesting. They wanted to spin these sites up for each of their customers, and they got it down from taking, I think originally it took about 2 days for them to spin something up, and by the end of the implementation, we had gotten it down to just about 2 hours. So when they had a large employer group come on, they could spin up a new site. This is business people, mind you, not the technical people in the background, not IT, not those expensive resources, but regular marketing people and interns even could come into the portal, create a new site, put the logo on it, and have somebody up and running in literally a matter of minutes in terms of large-scale business. So when we went into this particular engagement, it was one where they were trying to choose between SharePoint, WebSphere, Oracle's Web Center, and Liferay. And honestly, Microsoft withdrew because they couldn't get anything done in 8 months, and it kind of came down to being either WebSphere Portal or Liferay. Ultimately, Liferay won, and we got in and started delivering something to production, I think in about 2 months. So if I recall correctly, we started in April, and then we had something delivered in production in July. And then using an agile and iterative approach, we were able to deliver subsequent releases, continually adding value while they had clients that were signed up, continuing to sign up, and continuing to build out additional functionality over a longer period of time. So this was an implementation that overall took about 2 years to complete. And at the end of it, we finished up with taking the systems from 5.2 to 6.0 as part of the upgrade path, and we transitioned all of the code base over to their internal group that they grew over that period of time, so that they can completely support that entire solution without having to pay for us as the consulting partner with them. Some of the details, I think I've mentioned some of these details about that particular project, horizontal and vertical clustering. We did all kinds of integration with the enterprise systems, their back-end infrastructure, Oracle Access Manager and Oracle Identity Manager for single sign-on solutions so they could easily integrate with their existing infrastructure. We did some integration or implementations with Orbian Forms to replace Liferay's web form portlet, if anybody on the phone is familiar with that. Web form portlet is just a simple way for somebody to enter some information, have it saved to a database in a generic form. The business user would fill it out, and it just wasn't quite robust enough, so we integrated a different product for that. And then we also integrated or created several custom themes so that the business users could go in and manage things like color schemes, logos, and different aspects of the site. Built out several JSR 286 portlets, and we made a lot of extensive customizations or tailoring of Liferay system to meet the needs of this particular client. One of the major pieces of functionality that we built into that, of course, was the user attribute-based personalization. So, at this point, you may be wondering, really, what is personalization? And, I went out to Wikipedia and got a definition. I think this kind of is a really good description of what personalization is, but, for me, it's a little bit complex to really understand it. I mean, personalization is something, it's really how do you deliver your content to the right audience without getting that content to people that aren't in that audience. And when you think about it, that can happen over a variety of mediums. It can happen over the web. It can happen in emails. It can happen in your existing applications. Maybe you want to tailor forms to people that are interacting with your systems online. Maybe it's only people that are using a mobile device. You can really personalize and tailor your message to just about anybody that you know any kind of information about. And if anybody were to go out to Wikipedia, they'd see this definition and then a lot more information about personalization in general, which would be a really good overview if you're unfamiliar with the topic. So really it comes down to, it's all about what you know. What are the characteristics of your users? I mean, various demographic information, employer information, what kind of behaviors people exhibit. It could be anything that they're interested in, the context of which they're viewing something in. It really could be just about anything in your system. So the title on this slide is, it's all about what you know, and realistically it is. It's what do you know about each person in your system, or what, based on the data that you have in your system, what information can you derive out of that? And that's a key piece of personalization when you talk about web systems and web-based personalization, because it typically comes down to a couple of things. I've seen people talk about it in terms of groups of people, roles that people have, and things like that. But when you kind of lay it on a flat structure, it really comes down to each person in your system or each user in your system really just has a set of attributes that are associated with them. And those attributes aren't the raw data necessarily. It's information that you've culminated over a period of time and your experience or that person's experience with your systems and your company. So when you get that information, you need to aggregate the data into information into this user attribute repository. So kind of the rundown on personalization is how do you get that information into a system or out of your systems, which happens through some ETL processes that run either through some data warehousing, exports from your transaction processing system, information that you're querying and pulling directly out of Liferay to get it in there. And essentially, you just want all of your attributes that you know about somebody to be in a centralized attribute repository. So that typically happens in most cases through a nightly batch process. And then there are actually several other batch processes that would normally occur during this as well. So you put the attributes into an attribute repository. There's another batch process that would run that evaluates all of the users in the system and identifies which user collections they should be in. So if, for example, one of your users was a male smoker over 45, you don't want him to be in the female smokers under 45 group. So there's a process that runs through all of the user collections that you've identified the rules for and picks which users should be in each of those collections. And then when the user logs in to the Liferay system in particular, that user is associated with the categories or tags in Liferay that identify which collections that user should be in. And then when they come into any of the Liferay pages, the tags are pulled off of that user and their structure to tailor the information to them. So there's actually a query that gets submitted to the database that pulls out the appropriate content and displays it to them either in a list format or something a little bit more like a carousel, or it could be an advertisement, it could be a logo, it could be just about anything on the page. It could be a theme color or something like that as well. So that's just the basic rundown of personalization. So kind of making it a little bit easier for you to relate to what all that stuff is, I put together a picture that maps everything out pretty well, and I called out a couple of things about how it integrates with Liferay, some of the key features of it. So in this diagram, you notice that at the top there's that multiple systems of record. That's all of your back-end systems at the end of the day. It could be a data warehouse. It could be that online transaction processing system. It may be a phone system if you wanted to generate reports from customer service. It could just be any of your existing infrastructure, Access databases, flat files, Excel, all of that data that you have anywhere in your system that you need to aggregate or derive information about people from. And then associated with that is what's deemed here as a distribution list or a user collection management app, which is where you define the rules that associate people with the user collections. And basically, if you see down at the bottom right, there's a content author that comes in, creates the various artifacts, whether it's a mass email, web content in your system, associates it with the appropriate distribution list or user collection so that when a user comes in, it shows up correctly. And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail as we move into the system. So I can't harp on this enough. Obviously, the user attribute repository, this is kind of a critical piece. This is where the management application for the user collections actually looks to see what the rules are, or you derive rules that are based on the attributes that are in there. So let's say, for example, you wanted to create that role where gender equals male. The attributes that you need to have in there, one of the attributes that you need to have in there is gender. So how do you get that from point A to point B? And that happens through this ETL aggregation process. So we've done these implementations either in a batch process, but there could be scenarios where you have a SOA infrastructure in place, and maybe you want to have that happen in real time. So you could have a message that's sent over to this attribute repository, or sitting there looking, or something that's sitting there watching for the event to come through, and as soon as it sees that information, can update it in real time, so that the user that's actually interacting with your Liferay system could see the appropriate content immediately based on what that is. In our scenario, we specifically did not use Expando attributes on the user in Liferay. For anybody that's unfamiliar with Expando, Expando is a generic architecture where you can basically add attributes to anything, well, just about anything in Liferay, whether it's a page, a user, an organization, all these various artifacts. And that's, it would be fine to use Expando in a lightweight system, but if you're experiencing heavy load, you can run into some database contention issues with using that particular methodology or architecture for your implementation. So we've actually moved that out and decided not to use Expando specifically for that reason. All right, so user collections. What are user collections? And really, I've already talked about what they are, but one of the things that I haven't really described yet is that a business user that's technically savvy could go in and create rules around what defines their user collection. And those rules, some of the things that we see here are all male users from Texas, users who are over 50, and just various things that you might want to know or might want to base information off of or target information based on that. So, for example, let's say you were in a logistics company and you have a cargo truck where you lose that cargo truck for whatever reason, a hurricane comes through, or they hit an ice patch and they lose the entire load. You may want to, as the logistics company, send a very targeted information to everybody who was a shipper or a receiver of some of those goods. And one of the ways that you could do that is to identify in the back-end systems what those items were that were on the trucks and who they were associated with, and then target the email and website messages to the people that are the shippers and receivers using a personalization system. So kind of taking it away from identifying just the healthcare aspects of it, people that have arthritis or broken legs or whatever. They could be repeat customers. It could be people involved in some complex business logic scenario where you just need to send a message to a very small subset of your overall user base based on whatever the business rules are that you're defining. So in order to do that, we actually developed our own rules language. We had the option of using Drools. If anybody's familiar with the personalization solution that Liferay came up with, it uses the Drools rules engine. And we actually ended up not using Drools for this implementation either. We ended up creating our own scripting language where the user enters in the rules through the UI. And there were several reasons or several factors that went into not using Drools, but overall it came down to business users would not be able to easily use that solution to create the rules and manage those sets of rules. And in addition to that, we just didn't have the time and the budget allocated to do the integration with that particular rules engine. We found it quicker and more robust and more appropriate for end users to enter the simple scripting language into a web browser and save it. All right, so some of the things that user collections can be used to personalize. Yeah, I've mentioned content, which is, I think, something that everybody can relate to. That content could be a logo on a website, a banner ad, a news article. It could be a notice of an attention. Something happened. We need your interaction. You need to do this. But it could be also surveys. It could be forms that are in your system or other custom application artifacts. So your applications create things in your back-end systems. Those things could be integrated with the personalization system as well, so that you identify the specific audience that should be interacting with the things that those applications are creating. Hopefully that'll come through and make sense as we continue to go through this. And I highlighted this last piece in red. So I think this is a really important factor. User collections can also be used to report on a subset of the user population. So if you can easily identify and aggregate the users that meet some specific criteria, then just knowing that gives you the ability to report on them. All right, so kind of diving into this a little bit from the user attribute repository and the user collection management application. There are three key pieces here that come together in this application, and that is that the user collection management application is where you create these sets of rules. And a user collection could be something like the men with high cholesterol that are under 30. Well, when that user collection is created, it generates a tag or a category in Liferay into a specific vocabulary that you have set up. So whether it's, in this case, it was wellness activities, wellness programs, forms, mass emails, web content, all of those tags will be created directly into those categories. And when you're actually creating the scripting language or you're using the scripting language, we pull attributes from the attribute repository so that we can check the validity of what people are typing in there. So basically, they could be typing in all kinds of crazy stuff into a web browser, and it might not mean anything. It has to be very simple rule, or it could be complex, but logical rules such as gender equals M, city equals Austin, state equals Texas, is a smoker equals true, for example. So anybody that's putting that kind of information in, the users must be a little bit technically savvy. I mean, not everybody's going to be able to, without any training, just go in and write out a simple scripting language like that. It could be IT people in various organizations, but it's simple enough that if you have a technically savvy marketing person or a person that's maybe not in IT, but they like to tinker and play with gadgets and stuff like that, then you know, they'd probably be a great fit for managing and creating these user collections. I think one of the questions that came in was was the rules engine that was developed a portlet that was delivered via Liferay? And the answer to that is yes and no. There's a portlet that's integrated here, but the rules processing actually happens separately. It's the core piece of code. It's not an entire server altogether, and hopefully that answers the question. So early on I talked about there's a batch process that runs at night that evaluates each of the users in the system with each of the user collections and identifies whether or not that particular user should be in this particular collection. And that information is stored in a database that's kept outside of the Liferay system, so that we know that user A is in user collection 1, 7, and 9. And what will happen is when that user logs in, there are tags that are associated with collections 1, 7, and 9 in the vocabularies. There are categories in the vocabularies in Liferay for 1, 7, and 9. And we take the Liferay user and associate those tags with that user as part of the post-login process. So that actual processing happens outside of Liferay, but that core component for handling the validation and the logic and the scripting language is actually integrated with the user collection management application in Portlet. I've talked so far a lot about these rules that people create, and it's kind of hard to really get a good idea of what that is without seeing it. And there are 3 pieces of information that are on the screen. Hopefully it's coming through in the webinar really well. The 3 pieces that are important here are kind of the lower half. The top half, you can see what somebody would actually type into the text box. And there are some simple rules in there. Gender equals M, and home city equals Des Moines. But if you look at the lower pieces, there are some basic expression examples that somebody might put in. So whether the cholesterol level is over or equal to 100. Some functions and standard examples that we put in there. So doing date math, the section there in the middle identifies users that have a date of birth that sets them at an age where they're between 40 and 50 years old, essentially. And then for advanced expressions, we wrote out a complex scenario where business users can create multiple anding and oring of the attributes. So people who live in Texas but don't drive red cars after they go to the grocery store or something like that. Kind of a silly example, I guess. But it can't get to that level of complexity. Every business that's out there has some very specific rules that make it really difficult to identify with a vendor what information you're going to display. And most systems are actually set up so that whatever that piece of information is that you want to display is that piece of information. It goes out to everybody. Or you have to go through a role-based permissioning model, and it makes it difficult to maintain those types of solutions, because you can't just easily create and maintain user groups for all of the roles, which was one of the scenarios that we had talked about in doing it with this solution, which is, wow, we have this concept of user groups. User collections are really just a rule on a user group. Could we leverage those group scenarios? And, at the end of the day, it was just too complex in the UI for people to go in and manage it, since those user groups are something that are accessible to administrators. There are some aspects of that in this particular implementation that didn't make it feasible for the client to use the user group, so we elected not to do that. All right, so when do the users get evaluated? This is part of that nightly batch process. So the way that batch process works is it goes through, we have an actual user collection evaluator application, which uses the same component that's used for the rules engine and part of the back-end portion of the portlet. And it goes through each of the user collections, and I wrote in some examples: high-volume customers, long-time repeat customers, people in Austin, Texas who know someone with breast cancer, any of the various things that you can use with your business. It will go through each of those rules and evaluate each of the users that are in the system and determine whether or not they should be included with that. And so one of the things that you may be thinking is, well, how do I actually associate that content with that user? And and hate to keep harping on these men with high cholesterol that are under 30, but when a content author comes into the system, let's say that they know they need to create a banner advertisement so that anybody that's using the system that meets the rules for this collection will see it. So they'll log in as the content author role into Liferay. They'll go into Web Content Management. And when they're in Web Content Management, they will go down to a categorize page. And on that page, we've added some additional widgets to the page, buttons basically, where they choose the user collections as if it's exactly a tag. So they click a button that says user collections. The screen pops up just like it does for adding categories from Liferay. They scroll down the list to the appropriate one, which is the men with cholesterol under 30. They choose that one, and they save the piece of content. So from the content author's perspective, they know that they've created the right piece of content, and by going in and choosing this method of categorization, they know that this banner advertisement is only going to be displayed in the system to people that meet that particular user collection rule set. So web content is one of the examples, but it could easily be, mass emails, forms, calls to action. A marketing ad is another example for behavioral marketing, where you know the attributes about the user, but you're not using something like an omniture or some cookie-related information that people have derived somewhere else on the internet about the user that's using your system. And so the content delivery piece is actually a complex component. Getting the right information to the right people is surprisingly harder than it sounds. We've created the rules. We've created the user collections. We know which users are in the collections. We've even tagged the users with the appropriate tags when they come into the system. But surprisingly, even though you know all of this information about the user when they come into the system, it was surprisingly difficult to get them to see the appropriate content. There are a lot of challenges with showing the information to the right organization, only the right subscriptions, and things of that nature. So the way that we ended up approaching that was, I've already described a little bit, the post-login hook, where when the user logs in, we identify which user collections they should be in, and then we associate that user, the actual Liferay user object, with the categories. But then we also modified Asset Publisher Portlet so that the Asset Publisher Portlet would submit a custom query that would pick out the content type, the appropriate organization that the user was in, so that we could deliver content to 0 or more organizations, or all of them if we needed to, and then the specific user collections that the user should be a part of. So in a single trip to the database, just like Asset Publisher does now, it will go out and get the appropriate content to be displayed, and then render it using all the other display options that you want with Asset Publisher. So if you wanted to render a list of links, you could do that. If you wanted to render the entire article and do something like a page carousel where you have an image that's going around and around, or multiple images that are going around and around that are linked to various aspects of the system, you could do that as well. So a lot of flexibility built into that. So kind of recapping the personalization rundown, in this scenario that we had developed, there were more than 100 user attributes that we're pulling in from all kinds of systems. We had multiple data sources that were aggregating ETL into a single data store, which is basically an Oracle database. And then the nightly batch process is what evaluates each of the users, each of the collections, and identifies should this user be in this collection, and stores off that relationship in a database. And then the user collection memberships get saved to the user, or added to the user, when they're logging in. So after they've authenticated, the user gets tagged, they go to a page, and then the content that's tagged appropriately, or that matches the user's tags, also gets displayed. So some more information about this particular project. Hey, this was a really difficult project with some really demanding timelines. We did some really incredible work, and it was really exciting to work on. So it was just an incredible thing to see when we only had, I think, 3 or 4 people that were working on this personalization system, to see it come to fruition in just a matter of a few months. So putting this all in place, doing the user training, and providing a solution that's still in use today is just incredible. And then, kind of recapping the high-level overview, you can see how the system all works. I've pulled out each of the individual pieces throughout the presentation so you can see them a little bit closer. But I wanted to pull this one up again to kind of see if it would re-evoke any questions for any of the people that are listening. So, and I do have a couple of questions here that I'll go ahead and go through. And one of the questions is, how are the user collections associated with the user object via Expando attributes? And the answer is we're not actually using the Expando attributes. We elected not to use Expando. I mean, you definitely could. You could use Expando if you wanted to, but there are some database contention issues with Expando that didn't make it feasible for our solution. If you wanted to use Expando, I would recommend putting Expando into a NoSQL database and kind of approaching it from that angle. There's another question summarizing again how content gets pushed out to the user. Sure. So just kind of talking a little bit more along that vein. Hopefully that question just came in. So a little bit more about how content actually gets delivered to the user. There was a customization that we did with the asset publisher. So anybody that's familiar with Liferay and the asset publisher portlet, you'll know that some of the configuration there is that you can go in and identify what categories or tags the content should have that's going to be rendered in the asset publisher. So kind of basing the personalization system on that same concept, we modified the database query so that it's more complex than just, hey, go out and get me all the content that's tagged or categorized with these elements. We added some queries for things like which user is the organization in, what content type is it, which is also a category, not the web content type from the portal ext properties drop down, but actually a vocabulary that exists within Liferay. And based on that information that the user has associated with them on their user profile and the tags or categories that the content has on it as well, that the content author identified when they created or saved that piece of content, the database is queried and it redisplays that information through the asset publisher portlet. In addition to that, we also did some theme integration with the system so that banner advertisements, logos, and other things could be provided as well. So it wasn't necessarily all asset publisher, but that's the one that gives you the most flexibility about how you're going to render the content to the end user and what you're actually going to render to them. Okay, and there's another question, which is how does old content get categories or collections added as those collections are created? And the answer to that is simple. The content author has to go back in. If the message or that piece of content, if you create a new collection, it's not automatically going to go into your content management system and associate that collection with that piece of content. That's a manual process where the content author would need to go into the system and choose the user collection that it should be associated with. So there's a timing aspect related to that. So that's a good question. And
Derek, great job. I was going to say, great job getting through these questions. I know you took a couple of these as they came in, and I think you just hit on the last one. I wanted to mention, too, somebody had asked, and I posted this in the chat, but somebody had asked about this presentation being available afterwards, and we are recording it, and we'll have it available by video, and we'll include the deck that can be downloaded along with that. We'll send out an email in a few days to let you know when that's ready.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up, Ray. And I also wanted to mention, I kind of glazed over it before, but there is a case study that's available on Activia.com. Also, if you were to go to Liferay.com, we have a co-branded case study that's available out there for multi-tenancy wellness portal. Or if you were to just go to the Liferay website and type in personalization into the search bar, you'll notice that that some of this information that's on their site will also come up. I see there's another question about, are there other screenshots that are available to show, or something that shows more detail of the process involved? You know, I've got an entire flow chart that describes step-by-step all of the detailed interactions that you would need to go through from both an integration perspective, how the login process works, and essentially everything I've talked about today just mapped out in a nice diagram that makes it very easy for you to walk through and understand. Unfortunately, I don't have it loaded on this laptop, so I can't go right through it. But yeah, I do have a flow chart. Maybe we can talk offline about reviewing that.
And Derek just put up the slide here about how to contact us. If there's detail that you're looking for that we weren't able to cover, you can. Derek's provided his email address. You can contact him directly. You can also go to the Activia website and go to the Contact Us page. We have a form there that if you want to direct any questions to the broader audience at Activia, we've got a team of people that may be able to address those for you as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take on any questions. Honestly, personalization is an incredibly neat solution. I probably haven't done that concept any justice at all today in talking about it, but I'm really interested in it, and I'd love to share some ideas about how we can apply it to different verticals, different industries, different types of systems. You know, there are just a lot of really creative, fun solutions that can be developed using this type of technology. So please send me an email, send me your questions. You know, give us a call. I'd love to set up a more in-depth, detailed demo. I saw a question earlier, something related to what version. We had done this initially in version 5.2, ported it to 6.0, and we're currently working on a 6.1 EE integration as well. So a lot of great stuff going on with personalization and the capability to manage these complex rule sets and content delivery in Liferay.
Great, thanks on that, Derek. And Derek, I know this is, we had a comment come in. I know this isn't something that you would jump in and read, but on behalf of the rest of the audience, I want to read this. Somebody, one of our attendees, Scott, says, extremely impressed with what you've accomplished with this deployment. Great presentation. And I got to tell you, I agree with Scott. As I've been reviewing this with Derek over the last few days in preparation for this, I'm equally as impressed with what the Activia team's been able to do, and obviously it's getting a lot of attention because of that. So great job, Derek.
Great, thanks a lot, Ray.
Derek, I think you've done a good job taking these questions as they've been coming in, and I was just thinking about some of the conversation you and I have been having the last few days about where this is really being used, and it seems to be something that in the healthcare industry has really gained some traction,
sure,
but hasn't as much in other places. Did you?
Well, you know, it's funny. I don't know that it hasn't been adopted in other verticals. I just don't necessarily run across people in other verticals that I can easily explain it to or identify with in conversations where I get enough information that think it makes sense. And you know, I can think of various ways that you can use it in financial services or telecommunications or property insurance or logistics or retail. You know, retail is probably the easiest one to talk about because I think everybody identifies with that, and you know, we all get shoes or shirts, and stuff like that. And I mean, as a retailer, just think of this as the scenario is that, you know, people are buying, let's say you're a shoe vendor, people buy 5 pairs of shoes off of your website. Well, what if you also noticed that and you wanted to sell them a shoe rack? You know, if you have 5 pairs of shoes, maybe you need a shoe rack to go with that. That's one way that you can use personalization. Or let's say that you have some advertisement that you want to display. Let's say that you're a property insurer in Florida or Texas or Louisiana coast or the Gulf Coast. What if you wanted to auto-enroll people into a special aid program that have submitted claims after a hurricane? Personalization is the way that you could accomplish that. Or if you're in telecommunications or an ISP, you know that people are maxing out bandwidth for an hour every month and you wanted to offer them a special upgrade for your services. You could use personalization to identify who gets that targeted message, which ultimately means instead of just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks, you can target a specific audience that you know has a need and hopefully get a higher closing ratio as a result of that targeted communication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really it's fascinating to me what all can be done here. We had somebody mention telecommunications, applying this in the telecommunications vertical with personalization to cross-sell, upsell to existing customer bases or customer base. Another great example there.
Yeah, I think you know, there's a lot of buzz right now about behavioral marketing, and I think this is the type of system that really does tie into that quite well. The products that are out there right now, if you look at like Test and Target and Omniture and the various things, the various other systems that are out there, most of those are a conglomeration of websites that use cookies, and based on that cookie, they've aggregated and derived some information, you know, age, gender, interests, and stuff like that. Well, if you have all of that information in your systems and you don't need to get it out of other people's systems, then there's no reason that you can't do targeted advertising and focused communication with your user base. So there's absolutely no reason to not do those things. And I would challenge anybody to say that they're not going to have a higher closing ratio if they are identifying the appropriate people and sending them the right message instead of just showing the same message to everybody that comes into the system. You know, and that's a concept that's been around for years. I mean, you don't put an advertisement for cereal on the Discovery Channel or the Learning Channel where people are building houses. You know, you put it on a cartoon. You know, and that's a good use case of using personalization technology outside of a controlled enterprise ecosystem or enterprise portal system.
Right. Yeah. Derek, we've had 2 more questions come in. I'm thinking that we may have time just to get to these 2 more, although if anybody else submits something, we can see if we can squeeze those in. If not, we'll try and follow up with you afterwards. But one of them is about, here's the question as it was written. Is it possible to use the user collection attributes to personalize access within an application? In other words, can these attributes be extended through the permissions or application level interaction?
You know, that's a great question. I think they can. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but you could certainly use attributes for that. And as a matter of fact, I think there is a system out there who does that. I can't remember the name right now, but there's somebody that markets a product that's based on attribute-based security. Man, and please, if you ask that question, send me an email. I can identify to you what that product is or who the vendor is that has a product that does exactly that. Yes.
Great. And the other question was about social integration. Do you have any pending or previous deployments leveraging the social integration aspects of Liferay? Have you customized the Liferay Sync product to incorporate it as a tool for WCM?
So from the basic perspective, yeah, we have a lot of social integration aspects of Liferay that we've done, mostly around integration with things like posting messages from Facebook and Twitter, either within or back to one of those social media things we haven't built yet that I'm aware of, and maybe Vivek or somebody else that's on the line can answer the question, but I'm not aware of anything that we've done that would be a rebuilding of Facebook or Twitter or something like that, although it's certainly possible with Liferay. And as far as Liferay Sync goes, we've customized a lot of stuff with Liferay's web content management, but we haven't actually customized the Sync product yet. It's relatively new, so we're just kind of trying to find a scenario where there's a need for that within our client base before we can take that on.
Great.
Yeah,
go ahead,
Derek.
Derek.
Go ahead. Sorry, I was just going to say that I see that there is one more question, which is the Principal Wellness site a public site? And yes, it is. You can go to principal.com and go into wellness, the wellness section in there. Actually, if you were to download the case study, there should be links on there that go back to the wellness area within the wellness area within the principal.com site. The actual implementation that we did is available online publicly, but there's no information really to see. It's just a login that you would see. It's something that the benefit managers can give a URL to the employees that work at their office. They're presented with a login, and after you log in is when you see all the great stuff. So I could give you the website, but there's just not a lot to see there.
Okay, great. And on that note, Derek, I just put a link to the case studies page up through the chat. If you go there, you can see a number of case studies that we've posted, including the Principal Financial case study, but we also have one for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Alabama, Plum Choice, and a couple others that you'll see there on that page that you're welcome to download and take a look at. Derek, I think we're getting close enough to the top of the hour. Out of respect for people's time, maybe give a wrap up here. And I would say it does seem like there's some interest in learning more about this. As we mentioned, you can contact Derek. He's provided his email. If you have a specific project in mind that you'd like to discuss with one of our team members, you can email. Actually, probably the easiest thing to do would be to go to the website, go to the Contact Us page, fill out that form, and those come through. We respond to those very quickly. You can also call us directly and reach somebody at our main office. That number's there on the screen. And I believe it's extension 2 if you want to get through to sales directly to talk about a particular project. So Derek, great job. Do you have anything else? We just have about a minute and a half here before we close out. Anything else you want to offer?
No, I'd really just like to extend a sincere thank you to everybody that showed up and asked some really great questions today. I really just hope that the presentation gave you some really good insight and so maybe made you think about things in a new way with Liferay and personalization. You saw a lot of ways that you could integrate that with your vertical, your website, your company to really drive you to be much more successful or just have unlimited success in your enterprise. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Derek. I want to say again, quite impressive presentation. I think representative of the impressive work that you and your team have put together. Thanks for taking the time, and I know you put a lot of effort into preparing for this, so thank you for that, and also to the rest of your team for being willing to share some of these successes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks everybody for attending today. Again, we'll have this a video of this available in the next few days, and we'll alert you to that as to when that's available. We appreciate your time, and please keep your eyes out for future upcoming webinars. We actually do have a webinar scheduled for December on textual ETL. We'll be talking specifically about the healthcare industry, but I'm sure what we discussed will hit with a larger audience. I believe that's scheduled for December 8th, if I remember correctly. Actually, that's the November date. But go ahead and check our website under resources. You can go to the webinars page, and we'll have that webinar posted here shortly. So thanks again for attending, and we appreciate it.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected.